Dispute over territory far from resolved in the South China Sea. A landmark ruling 10 years ago invalidating most of Beijing's claims, but even then doing little to bring contesting states to any agreement. China itself boycotting proceedings then and since then never recognizing this verdict. But for Manila, the ruling serves as a valuable cornerstone of order rooted in globally recognized rules. And to look at this with us, Dr. Collin Koh, Senior Fellow at the Institute of Defence and Strategic Studies at RSIS from NTU in Singapore, and he joins us live. Dr. Koh, a cornerstone is only valuable if we are able to build on it. Has the Philippines made any progress building on this 2016 ruling?
I think it's important to note that over the past 10 years, the Philippines has managed to actually mobilize domestic support for the South China Sea policy, that is, especially under the current Marcos Jr. administration. But of course, in the past, earlier 6 years under the then Duterte administration, he chose to put the award on the back burner. So that sort of represented a lost opportunity. But under the current administration, there is not just domestic support, but there's also, of course, greater international support, largely from, of course, extra-regional powers, and, of course, greater defense and security engagement, as well as greater economic diversification that, in a way, contributes to its upholding of the South China Sea interests.
As the Philippines, along actually with other states in ASEAN, they have individually reached out both to each other on defense, whether it's in visiting Philippines with other countries, so the US, Australia, Japan, and European powers as well. Individual ASEAN countries also doing their own outreach on that. But taken together, does this support add up to what we need to see to bring a large power like China to any kind of concession on disputed territory?
I think we have to be realistic about the sort of outcomes that we will be looking at. I think domestically, it will be not palatable for China to actually roll back on what it's doing now without exacting a huge domestic political cost on itself. But what we have here, given the sort of very divided nature of ASEAN amongst the member states, because not all of them actually regard the South China Sea in their best interests, of course. So therefore, having individual ASEAN member states reach out to the respective regional and extra-regional powers and to build their own resilience, whether it's economic resilience or whether it is to beef up their defense and security capacity through training exercises, capacity building. I think all this adds up to what I would tend to see as a more robust position collectively by the various ASEAN parties. But what I will argue is that it will not compel Beijing to roll back, but at best, it will deter Beijing from going beyond what it's currently doing now, which is what we call gray zone coercion in the South China Sea.
Because the Philippines initiated proceedings in 2013. One of the reasons for that was it's a de facto loss of the Scarborough Shoal, parts of the Scarborough Shoal at that point to China. Does this ruling, and by your, I think we would admit, not as much progress as we might like to see on that ruling being delivered, does that suggest for you the limitations of dealing just legally with a larger power?
Definitely, I mean, the thing is that international law, one will argue, is as good as the ability to really enforce it. And of course, despite the overwhelming legal victory for Manila through the 2016 arbitral award, 10 years after, I think we have seen the clear limitations of the lack of mechanisms to truly enforce the award itself. But I think what is heartening to see, at least, is that right now, not just Manila, but even for some of the other ASEAN parties, directly, implicitly, or explicitly in some cases, they were actually trying to uphold the 2016 award together with interested parties within the region as well as outside the region itself. I think that altogether amounts to what I would tend to see as a cautiously optimistic perspective going forward, if we could keep up on that, I think we could at least keep the award alive, and at least we will always be able to use the award as a way to assert the primacy of international law in the South China Sea.
All right, negotiations ongoing for the code of conduct. So this is effectively just a conflict management tool should there be any eruptions of physical violence in the South China Sea. This is to manage that. But if this ruling, which was binding, the code of conduct at this point quarrel over whether it should be binding, what will the code of conduct achieve if this ruling has achieved relatively little?
The whole idea of the code of conduct is to at least give some level of certainty, given that the South China Sea is an international medium. It's not just the littoral states like the South China Sea parties in Southeast Asia or China, but we're also talking about the international community that relies heavily on the South China Sea as a conduit for seaborne trade and for other forms of communications. So therefore, the code of conduct is meant to give a form of certainty. At the same time, it does give the relatively weaker, smaller ASEAN parties to the South China Sea vis-a-vis China a certain level of insurance that at least the code itself is able to constrain in some ways the behavior of all parties. But I would say it's probably too early to say. I mean, we are currently right now in probably what we'll argue as the easiest part, which is the negotiation. The hardest part will be the promulgation of the code and the implementation of the code. I think that is where we will see potential problems arising.
Thanks, of course, ambitions that it will be promulgated by the end of this year in ASEAN. Thanks, Dr. Collin Koh, Senior Fellow at the Institute of Defence and Strategic Studies at RSIS in Singapore. Thank you.